Hey there, friends and enemies. JoPa here again, and today I want to talk about the state of the Borderlands franchise. Reasons I'm excited about the potential games we have coming in the future. Questions I have about the overall model of the franchise because I think there are some parts of it that are very outdated, and just my general thoughts about where Borderlands is heading in the future. So, jumping right into it, the reason I'm very excited, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands was a very successful spin-off. I know some of the DLC left a little bit of a bad taste in some people's mouth, but overall, I think Tiny Tina's Wonderlands was a success. Tales from the Borderlands, maybe not as much. That game that also released last year, the new one, because I think in general they just missed the mark on some things. However, I don't think that's the death knell for that type of game because there is a still an appetite for more lore, more character development within this franchise that can get people excited. So, while that game specifically wasn't the best, I think there's still a lot of potential there with new Tales games and other types of games in the franchise that could expand the universe as a whole that aren't mainline Borderlands games. We also have the Borderlands movie that is dropping in the near future. That is absolutely star studded, and at the very least, we'll get more eyes on the Borderlands franchise, which obviously is a good thing because you'll get more potential players in the game. Now, as far as a new mainline Borderlands game goes, we haven't heard a whole lot about it, but I'm very curious to see how they handle that because as far as what we've heard so far, you think there's a new one in the mix, and it would probably, I would imagine, follow a similar formula to past Borderlands games, but I do personally wonder if the model is dated. Now, I will caveat this by saying I am not a save quit farmer in the same way a lot of diehard Borderlands fans are, right? So that is out on the table. I kind of prefer the Destiny seasonal ongoing model in general, but I also think that wouldn't specifically fit Borderlands itself. So I think there are some other solutions that we would need to look at in order to have this game kind of find the right balance. And the reason I say that is that Borderlands in general, we've seen it with Borderlands 3, we've seen it with even Borderlands 2 back in the day, we saw it with Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. The model that it has is very good for die-hard Borderlands people who just enjoy the safe quit farming, and that is it. That's their main goal in the game. They just want to farm specifically for certain loot and then call it a day. But I think for a wider fan base, you need to have some alternative options to get people excited and keep them engaged over the course of time. One of the problems that I think the Borderlands franchise in general has had over at times is not really knowing what it wants to be because it is not a persistent game, right? It is not a live action game, and that is fine. However, we've seen that the kind of cross between a story based game but leaning into also an end game farmable activity has been a difficult balance for the franchise as a whole, in my opinion. So, what you want to have ideally is either a very strong campaign that is replayable, has a new game plus, ultimate vault hunter mode, something like that. That is the replayability there. Or you have a campaign that is a little bit shorter, like maybe the Destiny campaigns, or longer than that necessarily, with those bosses that you can farm, but a better, more fleshed out end game. And what that entails remains to be seen. Whether you do the takedowns that we saw in Borderlands 3, whether you have traditional raids and other looter shooters, whether it involves a open world more style, right? I've seen some things on Twitter and some videos where people suggested going the route of Fallout 76, where it's kind of after you beat the game, right, the main campaign, you have a fully fleshed out open world where you can interact with a lot of other players and all that kind of good stuff. You have open world bosses that you can farm. You don't have to save quit necessarily. Maybe they're on a timer. Maybe if you fast travel from one location to another, the bosses respawn. All of those are ideas that I think could fit the Borderlands franchise. either way, what I do know has to happen is the multiplayer has to be more seamless. I think as games have gone on, people have been more prone to want to play these games online with their friends. And sometimes with Borderlands games, you're caught not being able to stick in a party, and it's kind of tedious to have to drop a party, rejoin all the time because it's just not really working well together. And that's the one fix that absolutely needs to happen. Other things is deciding what the game wants to be. These DLC that drop that are kind of irrelevant after a short period of time can be very frustrating, because what happened in Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, for example, that was incredibly frustrating for me, is the main place to farm your chaos levels was in the chaos chamber, right? It's the only place, and you would farm the chaos chamber, upgrade your chaos levels just to get better gear to farm more chaos chamber. It was incredibly boring and repetitive. You need multiple options of endgame if you want players to keep coming back, if that's the main goal. But instead, Borderlands games tend to have like a kind of in between problem where you want to come back and keep farming, but there's not enough there, and it does get repetitive, it does get boring. But also they don't focus enough, so either the campaign with the replayability of the campaign is not good enough, or the end game is not good enough, and either way neither one of them feels like they're as good as they could possibly be. And I think Borderlands 4 needs to pick which one of those it really wants to shine, focus on that, maybe have the campaign be really good, have the bosses you fight be really good, and then have that be the end game where you go back through and have a true ultimate Vault Hunter mode, or whatever the case may be, with farmable pearlescent loot that is very, very quality, right? And that's the gameplay loop. And then you farm the end game bosses, and then the DLC, ultimately maybe you have those be takedowns, maybe you have them be horde mode, boss rush style, whatever the case may be. But that would be what Borderlands 4, the next main franchise, is. And then if for maybe a Wonderlands, you pivot and you do have the Chaos Chamber, but its DLC type activities are different, right? They don't feel like the same type of waves of activities like the Chaos Chamber was. They provide something different, and they also provide those chaos levels, so you don't just have to farm the Chaos Chamber over and over and over again in order to level up, because that is somewhat tedious after a while. Now, like I said, the other options will be transitioning to more of either not live service necessarily, but more of an ongoing model where you do have weekly events. You do have bosses that maybe say your weekly event as this boss get buffed up to the max, makes it very, very difficult, but also very rewarding to beat that boss, etc., etc. And you can make it open world where you can take on a giant boss with 8, 10, 12 other Vault Hunters at one time. And I don't know. There's a lot of ways for them to handle that. But whatever they do, they just really need to make sure that their focus is limited at first in order to make the things that it does well the best it could possibly be, instead of having again, a campaign that's not as good as it potentially could be, and an end game that's not as good as it potentially could be. Because I think if you leave all of them feeling underwhelming, initially everyone's going to have fun with the game. Everyone's going to enjoy their first couple weeks. But when you look back at something like Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, I think the longevity of it is not really there. So people are frustrated now more so than they were initially. So you look back on the game and you're like, is this game going to hold up as well as I might have liked? Probably not. And that's unfortunate. Borderlands 3 is kind of a different issue. Borderlands 3, I think, wasn't received well initially and was missing a lot of features that Borderlands 2 had, or Borderlands 2 brought, or people expected in the transition from Borderlands 2 to Borderlands 3 that just were not there. So I'm very hopeful about the future of the Borderlands franchise. I really think they do bosses very well. The gear is very nice. There's so much potential here with Borderlands games that I'm very excited about. They just need to really make sure they hit on what they want to do and keep it a little bit more simple, so that way you're not trying to get people playing endlessly. You know what I'm saying? If that's not the goal, or if it is the goal, have it so the content is varied enough to keep people coming back over and over again. Boss save quitting is something that needs to be updated and modernized. Otherwise, I think people are going to lose interest with that as well. There needs to be something unique about the next Borderlands game as well that makes it feel like a Borderlands game, but gives it that new age kind of feel, that modernizes it for the next gen consoles, the modern PC gaming, and has people very, very excited to keep playing over and over again. So what that is, I don't know. I'll leave that up to the developers, but those are my thoughts on the state of the Borderlands franchise, why I'm excited, but also some questions I have going forward. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. Helps me out tremendously, shows you want to see more content from me. I love every Borderlands game. I've enjoyed it all from the time I picked it up to the time I put it down. I just want the next game to be the best possible game it could be, and hopefully that is the case, because I'll definitely be playing it regardless. So subscribe to the channel if you want to stay tuned for more Borderlands, Wonderlands, and other looter shooter content from me going forward. My name is JoPa. I hope you have a good one, and I'll catch you all later.